The Peruvian Interior Ministry removes police security for members of Congress as the country's political situation continues. Anti-austerity protests sparked by fuel price increases are met with violent police repression in Ecuador. And police and soldiers are to begin a 5-month anti-crime training exercise in Trinidad and Tobago. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Stefania Bravo and this is from the South. We begin in Peru, where the Interior Ministry has withdrawn police security for members of Congress on the grounds that the body has been dissolved, as Peru's largest political crisis in decades continues to develop. Our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, has the details.
4 days after dissolving Congress, President Martín Vizcarra has finally spoken while attending an event in the Amazon. He said that he always acted legally and backed by the Constitution. It has been confirmed that today the Ministry of the Interior has withdrawn members of the Congress's police security. The only remaining members with police security are the 27 members of the Permanent Commission. Some members tried to enter the Congress today, but were prevented from doing so, as a way to prevent Congress from meeting, as it has been dissolved. The Constitutional Court will be meeting on October 10th to decide if the executive's decision to dissolve Congress was constitutional or not.
We thank Jaime for that report. Moving on, Cuba and Russia have strengthened economic, social and cultural ties as the Russian Prime Minister continues his visit to Havana. Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev arrived on the Caribbean island October 3rd and met the Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel. The two countries are building their bilateral cooperation and a front against the economic blockade imposed on Cuba by the United States.
In today's talks, we've stated the progress of the effective participation of the Russian Federation in the economic and social development plan of the Republic of Cuba until 2030. We are certain that in the current complex international context, relations between the Republic of Cuba and the Russian Federation will continue to strengthen for the mutual benefit of our peoples and governments.
The Russian Prime Minister reaffirmed Cuba's position as an important partner for his country in Latin America, going on to criticize the United States for tightening the economic blockade on Cuba in recent months.
Our meeting has once again shown that Cuba is an important partner of Russia in Latin America. Our bilateral relations are long-term and are not affected by the short-term situation. We build them on mutual respect, mutual interests and friendship. Not everyone welcomed this equitable dialogue over the past few months. The United States has significantly tightened the economic blockade of Cuba. It clearly wants to create a toxic atmosphere around its partnership with the island, scare off economic investors, and create a form of energy blockade.
People in Brazil mobilized on Thursday in defense of education and the country's sovereignty. We have more in this report.
The government of Jair Bolsonaro plans to continue implementing budget cuts in the education sector, as the budget for 2020 will be 18% smaller than it was for 2019. Meanwhile, funds allocated for the investment and public spending will equal those from 10 years ago. Primary education alone will see a loss of close to $115 billion, according to a study by the Workers' Party.
We are seeing a reduction of salaries and a lack of investment in schools for the better development of our education.
Thursday's march also rejected the planned pension reform, which seeks to increase the retirement age.
This government has a plan that will not help us build towards our future. They are taking away our rights, like our right to a comfortable retirement, to the use of our retirement funds.
Just like here in Macayo, other cities mobilized to show their resistance against the neoliberal measures of President Jair Bolsonaro. On the day that state oil company Petrobras turned 66 years old, students and workers raised their voices against Bolsonaro's privatization plans.
Our country's sovereignty is of the utmost importance. When we see that the government wants to privatize our biggest industries and companies, that hurts our sovereignty as well as our growth.
In a country with almost 13 million unemployed citizens, people welcome these mobilizations.
I support this. We need more people to stand up. If nobody does, then nothing will change.
Mobilizations such as this are planned until November, standing in defense of the Amazon, public institutions, and of Brazil's sovereignty.
Coming up after the break, we hear from Professor Fernando Casado about the tense political situation in Ecuador. Stay with us.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur. Welcome back to From the South. An indefinite strike by public transport workers in Ecuador continues for a second day while the government has declared a state of emergency to curb massive protests. Mass protests are being met with heavy police repression and, according to authorities, 368 people have been arrested. Roads across the country remain blocked and the government suspended classes for the second day in a row. The strike is a reaction to the government's decision to remove state subsidies for fuel and diesel, nearly doubling the price of the latter. This forms part of a number of austerity measures, which include mass layoffs and amendments for the workers' rights. The government's new economic program has been implemented to meet the requirement of a $4.2 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund. But as protests continue, a number of union and student leaders have been detained. According to the Attorney General's office, in the city of Cuenca, 2 transport union leaders were arrested, while in Quito, the leader of the taxi drivers union was also detained, allegedly for their role in promoting the strike. Meanwhile, the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities announced the arrest of Marlon Santi, the coordinator of the Pachacutic Party, along with 2 indigenous youth leaders.
It's not just transport workers affected by the fuel price rise. Everything is passed on to the people. The cost of living for a family is going to increase totally. Right now, we're barely scraping by, and it's going to be even worse with the measures the national government is adopting. They should have done something different. They should have been more aware.
The Ecuadorian Ombudsman Office has called on the Constitutional Court and the Prosecutor's Office to denounce state repression of anti-austerity protests, saying it falls within their jurisdiction. In a statement, the Ombudsman Office said that the Constitution obliged the Prosecutor's Office to prevent the unwarranted use of legal measures against human rights defenders. The letter, signed by Public Defender Freddy Carrion Intriago, adds that as a national human rights institution, it is concerned about the excessive and disproportionate use of force in the name of so-called public order. They said that they have received information of police abuse against legitimate protesters in all of their regional delegations in the country.
The Ecuadorian president, Lenín Moreno, has spoken from the city of Guayaquil after having abandoned the capital, Quito, last night. He said that the rise in fuel prices and the austerity measures announced are the ethical way to distribute public resources.
You know that these measures, although tough, have to be accepted because they're a match to the reality in Ecuador. They're the ethical and moral way to manage and distribute public resources.
The president went on to say that the removal of fuel subsidies is a non-negotiable issue.
The measure is firm. I want that to be absolutely clear. I'm not going to change my mind. We can talk to find ways to alleviate it. Incentives for those who may be affected by the measure.
To talk more about the current situation in Ecuador, we are joined live by Fernando Casado. He's a university professor, author, and analyst. Thank you, Fernando, so much for your time.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Fernando, for the past 2 years, Lenín Moreno's government has continued to talk about freedom and freedom of speech. But today, as protests continue, over 350 people have been arrested, including indigenous and transportation leaders. What is your opinion on that?
Well, Lenín Moreno, since he got into office a couple of years ago, as you said, has turned into a right-wing government. He has used as a facade the freedom of speech and the dialogue, but when it comes to implement his measures, he has been extremely tough. It's not just now that police is using disproportionate use of force. It's also that, for example, the so-called political persecuted that are related with the former government of Rafael Correa has also been forced to flee, for example, the country, or he has used illegal measures to finish with his opponents. So this, together with the neoliberal measures that he is implementing, is not something that is new at the moment in Ecuador. Perhaps what is new is that this measure or this use, disproportionate use of force, using also the military, even real fire and bullets has been used against the demonstrators, is maybe now that is generalized all over the country because of the demonstrations against the measures that he has announced a couple of days ago. But this is not something new, I would say. I would say that he has been using these illegal or outlaw measures since he got into office, and since he also betrayed his electoral program. Let's remember the audience that in the beginning he was supposed to have a continuation government of the so-called citizens' revolution, but he turned completely from progressive measures to rightish neoliberal measures. So this is the result of the implementation of these neoliberal measures. In order to be able to impose them over the population, he has to use the force, because in a way, this is, I would say, as Naomi Klein would say, this is a sort of shock doctrine. First is trying to cause fear in the population in order to be able to impose these neoliberal measures.
Fernando, now the government of Moreno has condemned the strike, saying it wants to destabilize his administration, and has also reaffirmed the economic measures, including the rise of gasoline prices. What do you think about that?
No, yeah, now it's not really the government of Moreno that is ruling. What we see is that once he turned back his own allies in order to go to the right wing, in order to get closer to the US, in order to get closer to the IMF, what we have seen is that for him, in order to be able to impose these measures, he has to use the force, the use of force, this disproportionate use of force. We have not seen these riots in Ecuador since the governments before Rafael Correa. And of course, this is something that is keeping the population in shock. At the same time, the population is reacting also, having more and more tough riots against the impose of these measures. Imagine the negative consequences that these measures are going to have. He has doubled the price of fuel, what is going to increase the prices of mobilization and also the price of goods, even the everything that has to do with food and different goods that people have to acquire. So the level of poverty, the level of the force of purchasing power is decreasing dramatically in Ecuador, and we haven't seen how these measures are going to be in reality. So far, it's only the announce of the measures that took place 2 days ago, but people are reacting because they know what is coming. People know that they are going to be impoverished dramatically from now on. Also, together with this increase of the price of the fuel, also the flexibilization of the labor law is going to decrease the amount of people employed. The unemployment is going to increase, and also people that are going to be able to keep their jobs, they will be decreased their salaries. At the same time that for the employer is going to be much easier than now or until the announcement of the measures to fire people. So this, of course, is going to affect the majority of the population, and especially the people with less resources and less living standards.
Now, Ecuador's president has also announced a 60-day state of emergency. What does this mean for Ecuadorians?
What he's trying to create is also this atmosphere of fear in Ecuador. This announcement of the state of emergency is absolutely focused on trying to demobilize the transport groups that are now blocking virtually the whole country. You can see roadblocks in every important city and in every important road. And at the same time, he's trying to curb and trying to prevent demonstrations against the measures. What he's now letting the military and also the policemen do is that without any previous announcement, they can simply try to dismantle all these Pacific or all the demonstrations all over the country, also in order to prevent these blocks from going on. So in a way, what we have seen or what we are seeing here in Ecuador is a situation of a real dictatorship, where rights like the rights to association, meeting or demonstration have vanished completely, even against the rights that are implemented or in the Constitution.
Now, Fernando, yesterday night, while protests were taking place here in Quito, President Moreno headed to Guayaquil. Why do you think he took this decision?
I think that the situation yesterday afternoon in Quito, because of the demonstration, they were surrounding the presidential palace that is located in the historic center of Quito, made him be afraid of the demonstration taking over the palace. And what has happened normally in Ecuador before the government of Rafael Correa, in the 10 years period before Correa's term, 9 presidents have to flee the presidential palace in a decade. So in order to prevent that situation from happening, he moved to Guayaquil next to a military compound in order, according to his version of the story, in order to lead the military and the policemen operations. But in a way also what we have seen in that gesture and in that movement of President Moreno is a weakness and fear of being trapped inside the presidential palace.
Fernando, and lastly, what do you think is next for Ecuador? Do you think the strike will continue?
Now we are in one of his last intervention, President Lenín Moreno was accusing the demonstration of being lazy people. And now we are talking about the lazy bones revolution. It seems that the repression is not finishing with the demonstrations, is not finishing with the roadblocks and with the transport strike. So I would say that Moreno's government will be at stake if the demonstrations continue. And so far, it seems that instead of decreasing the level of riots and unrest of the demonstration is increasing. So keeping the demonstrations would maybe I don't know if put an end to Moreno's government, because of course he has the support of all the right-wing opposition that now is sharing power with him, as we have seen when other opposition leaders has been speaking and supporting Lenín Moreno, but he might have to be able to be forced to withdraw at least some of the measures. So far, he has said that he's not going to change the measures he has announced and imposed, but I don't think that it's sustainable, the situation of the country, if the situation stays as it is now. And it seems that the strikes will continue, the demonstrations will continue, the unrest will continue. So one of the two actors will have to set back, and it seems that it will have to be the government.
Fernando, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English.
Thank you to you.
We have been speaking with Fernando Casado on the current situation here in Ecuador. Still to come, we take a look at massive protests calling for the Haitian president's resignation. Stay with us.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From the South. Police and soldiers will begin a 5-month intense anti-crime exercise across Trinidad and Tobago. Operation Strike Back 2 was launched earlier on Friday and will see additional resources being used in the fight against crime. The police commissioner has asked members of the public to come forward with information which can assist police with information to find the criminals.
No street, no block, no area belongs to any criminal element in this country. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, we will move forward, we will do what is required within the law. And again, to the public, you will be seeing roadblocks, stop and search, warrants, and it is really to suppress the criminal elements. These individuals, they are not the Robin Hoods of a society. They are the enemies of the state. We intend to do what is required. We looked at the statistics over just the last week in comparison to the same time last year and during this week. There's an 88% reduction in serious crime in this division.
And staying in the Caribbean, we're in the latest round of planned anti-government demonstrations dubbed Operation Lockdown. Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince. As anger over the economic and political problems in the country grows, Haitians set fires and blocked major roads in the capital city with debris and flaming tires. There were reports that protesters faced violent police repression. Residents have been incensed for months at widespread fuel and food shortages, double-digit inflation and corruption allegations lodged against the president and other public officials. Several people have died in recent clashes.
We're in the street to say that it's not normal that the core group and the international community continue supporting President Jovenel Moïse, even though every day there are new deaths. The police are repressing protesters. Jovenel is a liar, a criminal, corrupt, a murderer, a cancer.
We're going to the United Nations to say to them, if President Moise is good for them, they can have him. But for us, in this country, he is not good. They are killing people. They have their own group of criminals that are killing our children. Today we say enough. Jovenel has to step down and leave the country for someone who can govern.
Bahamas Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis is warning irregular immigrants who survived the passage of Hurricane Dorian that they will not be allowed to stay in the country. Addressing the parliament, he said the country's immigration laws will be implemented.
We are a country of laws, and laws with respect to illegal immigrants will be carried out. However, they will be carried out in a humane manner. Therefore, I send a notice to all those who are illegals that they can leave voluntarily, or they will be forced to leave.
Meanwhile, human rights groups Right Bahamas has criticized the decision. It said the government's announcement was an about face from its earlier declaration that it will not target migrants who were also victims of the storm. Rights Bahamas added that the deportation plan is political posturing aimed at currying favor with xenophobic elements of the populace. And finally, no doubt the memory of St. Lucia National Botham Jean will live in the hearts and minds of his family and those whose lives he touched. John's former colleagues at accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers in Dallas are among the people who have sought to keep his memory alive. They've unveiled a large memorial portrait of the forever 26-year-old. In the artwork, Jean looks across the room with a smile. The portrait is composed of 10,000 wooden rods, each painted in the vibrant colors of John's native St. Lucia. This week, former Dallas police officer Amber Geiger was slapped with a 10-year sentence after she was convicted of murder in the fatal shooting of John in his apartment last year. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
Infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American